Hello everyone. Today we're going to be starting the section of the course on lighting. However, it's struck me in the past that we're often in the situation where we get the instructions for what we're going to do to prepare for lighting. So for example, we'll get this, which is a lighting plot, about which I'll explain more in a minute. And then we just go right ahead and do it.
Okay, bye-bye.
And often it's no explanation has been given as to why any particular light has been chosen or what the overall purpose of this is. And it takes people considerable time before they figure out on their own, or somebody gets around to explaining how this particular set of instructions, which is called a light plot, was arrived at, and what the reasoning for it is. The one you're looking at here is from a program that's no longer operable called MacLux, but it was the first program of much usefulness, in my opinion, for lighting, because it actually did a lot of the work that otherwise you'd have ended up doing by hand. Which is not to say that you have to use a program like this. Here's a show that was done at SFU for the Push Festival, as is shown here. It's by a very respectable designer named Jonathan Ryder. This show toured extensively in Canada, although presumably it had also some much more impressive looking drawings that went with it. But my point is that the drawing itself is not, in fact, crucial. Although, obviously, if you have better drawings, you're probably likelier to get more of a respectful treatment from technicians, and it's going to convey the message that you're organized. But the critical thing to understand is that each of these positions, each of these types of instruments, ultimately are part of a artistic set of decisions, and that it's not always obvious to people starting out how these are arrived at. If you ask somebody that has no experience in lighting design about what it's doing, they would probably say, well, it's making it possible for you to see. It's making it possible for, in a space that would otherwise be dark, for the performance to be illuminated, and therefore we can see. But really, it's a lot more complicated than that. Lighting design, if you think about it, is doing a lot of different things. For example, unlike something lit for film or television, or for that matter, photography, there is nothing constraining the audience from looking wherever they want to look. And consequently, a lighting designer, as well as making things visible, is making things selectively visible. They're in effect bringing focus to the performance. It's also possible for a lighting designer to manipulate an awful lot of things that are fundamentally design. So they can, through the creation of light and dark and color and shadow, they can create a sense of place, time and place, the passage of time, transitions, mood, and almost anything that you can imagine. And some types of works, lots of times dance, don't have any any settings. They don't have any sets. They don't have backdrops with projections or anything else. And the lighting design can be fundamentally the biggest part of the visual design. Lighting design can create a sense of movement. It doesn't have to be a moving light. It can be a shift in light brightness and types of patterns on the stage from one part of the stage to another. It can work with movement. It can create the equivalent on stage of crossfades in a film, or it can it can just do almost anything you want within the stipulations that you're sitting there in a theater, and that what you see is what you get, essentially. So my interest is in explaining at the moment what is behind the mechanical side, if you like, of choosing a particular lighting instrument. And if you understand that before you go ahead to learn the mechanics of the appropriate ways to set up lighting equipment, then you are on your way to becoming a designer, or even closer to your starting point, a more knowledgeable and ideally more helpful technical person, because you're not just going to be going out there like somebody packaging goods in a factory. You're going to be thinking, and you're going to be thinking with background and with knowledge about what the lighting equipment is doing. So it's not all that easy to see when you see something like this, but if you look at this is actually a lighting plot for a dance piece. It's once again in this previous program here, Mac Lux, but that's all right. And actually, I could explain a little bit about why I thought this was the first useful program, because lighting designers work in really different ways, but one of the things they have to do is go from the conceptual idea of what they want to do with the lighting equipment, which in most situations is derived in a collaborative way with the creators of the piece, whether that's the choreographer or a director or a set designer, costume designer, projection designer, all the elements of the design team, the design team. And they're working with those people. Sometimes it's a very, very specific and unique event. So, for example, this is some an older drawing of mine from the SFU theater. Because I don't have access to this program anymore. What you're looking at here is half the lighting plot. I'll explain a bit more about this in a moment. So that's the part of it on one side of the stage, and here's the part of it on the other side of the stage. But this is a theater piece where each and every scene was specifically placed on the stage. On the other hand, here's a student dance show here. This is a lighting plot that was intended for a student choreographed work that had, this is, by the way, one of our studios. This is Studio D, more on that later. And this had to work for, I forget, 6 or 7 different dance pieces. So it's a kind of approach to lighting which is often referred to as festival style lighting. A really simpler version of that is, and quite a simple version of that. Here's a lighting plot from Salt Spring Island, from the Art Spring Theater there, and this is the house lighting plot that is always hung there in the theater. It's not very big. It's designed to be generally useful. This is quite an old drawing, but this is an approach that's fairly typical, where you've got a theatrical venue that does many things. And then so a typical approach here would be that you have a lighting plot that is always there in the theater, and it is an attempt to make this useful, whether you're looking at a music performance or a panel discussion, or almost anything. So how does somebody arrive at this? Let's assume for the moment that you actually have an idea of what you want to do. First thing you need to be able to do, unless you can go right to the theater and work it out on the spot, usually not very successful, because you're usually having limited time. At the very least, you're asking people to come and patiently wait there while you think about these things. Sometimes you're not able to go to the theater at all, and once you have an idea for a particular thing that you want to execute in the lighting, you have to know enough about how to put together the lighting so that it's going to work acceptably, because it's rare that anybody would get the chance to try things out and then redo them and redo them and redo them until they got it right. So you have to be able to plan. Let me take a moment here and talk about these drawings. We'll come back to the drawings at other times, but it's not always the case that these drawings make total sense to people. So it's a kind of a drawing that isn't what you would see, in the sense that it's not like an artistic sketch, or it has no sense of perspective, and it doesn't by any means show everything that you want to portray, in the sense of everything that's there like a photograph. So you have to be able to take information about the theater and extract what you need for the working lighting plot. So it's not really within the purview of this course to talk about lighting design specifically, but let's just say that I can give you a brief sense of Jonathan's work here for Winners and Losers, and then can use that as an example of how he would go from his intentions, or the task that he has to fulfill, to this drawing. So Winners and Losers is a 2-person show that has 2 performers sitting at a table, if I remember correctly, engaged in a conversation. And so it's set in an environment, but if you just look at this, without even a whole lot of knowledge, you're going to see that the lights tend to be centered around something that, now that I've told you that, you can understand is a table somewhere here. But this is a hand-drawn sketch, and there's lots in here that's better understood by looking at a more accurate or a more carefully laid out drawing of the space. So this was performed in Studio D. Here's the one version of the Studio D drawing from the drawing from the same space, right? So this is actually the architectural computer-aided design drawing, the CAD drawing, but it'll do for our purposes at the moment. So this view here is called the plan view. Plan view is an accurate way of talking about an overhead view, or I don't know, a bird's eye view or whatever, but it also allows me to talk for a moment about this kind of drawing, because there is no point of view in this drawing. It's more like you took the theater and traced it and then shrunk it down. So involved in that description are a whole series of concepts. One is, this is a scale drawing. So on these are the original architectural drawings from the Goldcorp Center. So it would probably have something on it that said in a metric drawing, it would have said, I don't know, 1 to 50, 1:50. So what that means is that any dimension on this drawing in a printed format, so not one that you can zoom in and out of, but a printed format, is 1/50th the size of the real thing. So everything is shrunk by a proportion, and it's the same proportion for the whole drawing. In imperial system, we typically talk about something like common drawing size, because when it's printed, it's a handy size piece of paper, is what we call 1/4-inch scale. Okay, so 1/4-inch scale, for those of you who are not imperially based in the sense of measurements, every inch has 4 quarters, clearly. There are 12 inches in a foot, and therefore there are 4 times 12, or 48 1/4 inches in every foot. So if I express that as a proportion, it would be 1 to 48, which is remarkably close to the metric 1 to 50. And that's a key thing about this, because what it tells anybody who needs to know is that if you have a full-size version of this, you can actually measure on it with a scale ruler, for example, or the equivalent, and you can know that from this line, whatever it is, to this line here is, in our case, more or less 2 meters. But I can actually know the sizes of things. So if I go back to the Art Spring Theater, here's one of the drawings out of the set of information that you can get as a designer or anybody coming in. And this tells you the actual sizes of things on the stage. And when this is printed out, now in this case it's measured, which is very handy because I can actually make this smaller and larger, which is very common now with electronic communication. And I can know now in the architectural world, I can lock these things in ways that mean that you can't go wrong. But in this case, no matter what size I'm looking at it, or what zoom in or zoom out I've got, I can always reference one of these dimensions and compare it to something that isn't dimensioned. Okay, so this is the case with the Studio D plan here. This is the same room that this lighting plot is drawn in. Because what a designer has to do is they have to go, all right, for whatever design reasons, I want a very tight beam of light to come down on Jamie Long at one end of the table, and a tight beam of light to come down on Marcus Youssef at the other end of the table for reasons that we don't need to go into here. I want it to come in at, say, an elevation of 45 degrees from the side. And I have to know what position on the lighting pipe grid am I going to use, and what instrument I'm going to use according to its fixed beam width to accomplish what I want. Why I want that, who knows? It can be anything from I just want them to look well lit and three-dimensional, or it can be, the classic thing people talk about is the beam of moonlight coming through the window in the set from a moon that appears to be somewhere outside of the theater, right? So I've got to figure out where I'm going to position these things. So if I go back to this, the task really is, I need a three-dimensional understanding of this theater. And yes, nowadays you can go on a website for, as I did last night, for example, for the Annex Theater, part of the Vancouver Civic Theater complexes. And there's a lovely 3D animation. I can zoom it around, it'll do it, and get a very good sense of the theater, but it's not accurate to this in the sense that I can't know, in order to get an angle that I want, both in the horizontal and the vertical, how far away is there going to be a place to hang a light that will give me that angle, and therefore that's called the throw distance. And therefore, if I want a performer on this part of the stage standing in a body-sized circle of light, or oblong really, circle of light, what instrument do I choose? It can be as simple as that. Well, you've got two sets of drawings. This is the plan view, and then here are a number of what are called elevations. So this is the same room, all right? And this northeast, southwest, because these are architectural drawings, they are, an elevation is looking horizontally across the room. So, for example, this one here, the east elevation, is looking from the west side of the room across to the east side of the room. And the east side of the room, if you go back and look at the tour, this in that room is the tech ledge. We came in on it, Vlad and I, and you can actually walk in on it, as opposed to the west side of the room across the way where you can't. There's nothing there except a wall of mirrors, and then that's what's on that wall. But what's here are in fact side view cutting through the space of these pipes, right? And so typically what would be supplied and what a lighting designer would care about is not so much an elevation drawing looking all the way to the ends and the four ends of the room, in effect, because this is looking to the north, and then this is looking to the south, and these are windows, right? And so this space here, which is blank, corresponds to this part of the room here that is actually not in the room itself, because it is the mechanical parts of the room, or the storage parts of the room, and up above it is the tech ledge. So typically what would be supplied at a minimum is what's called the plan view. And if it was specifically designed to be used by lighting people, it would be in fact a little bit different than I've been leading you to believe, because the drawing that as a lighting designer I would want would be what's called the reflected ceiling plan, meaning it's like the whole floor was a mirror, and this is what I would see reflected in the mirror. Or like the ceiling miraculously disappeared, and I'm looking down and I can see in scale, with no perspective, all of the things I care about as a lighting designer, namely, where can I hang a light, or the grid. So that's another very important aspect of these drawings, is that they don't show everything. Like the difference between this architectural drawing and ones we'll see later that are really specifically aimed for technicians is that, well, let me see. I think here's no, that's the same thing. How about, yeah, no, that's also the same thing. Yeah, okay, so here is a more recent drawing done by a student designer in a CAD program called Vectorworks. And this is perhaps even a better example, because these drawings are schematic. They're not realistic, they're schematic. They only show what I care about from the point of view of the person needing this particular drawing. Lighting designer, really interested in having a reflected ceiling plan and a sectional drawing, which really goes from right through the middle of the space from one end to the other, which is called a centerline section. And we'll see those, but I didn't happen to have one readily available to me. But if you think about it for a minute, you realize that if you have this overhead drawing here, the plan view, and you have a centerline section, this one, only these are actually not sectional drawings typically. But if I take the centerline section here, if I was to place it printed up exactly the same size as this drawing here, and I erected it vertically on the center line, I would end up with a very good understanding of what the three-dimensional aspect of this space is, because a full center line section, for example, is going to give me, let's see, we've got, yeah, so here, this is the Wong. So this is the Fay and Milton Wong Theater, okay? Let me walk you through this drawing. If I can stop doing that, it would be great. Okay, so look, this is a section through the whole of the Fay and Milton Wong. And we went through this on the video, or you can look at it again. Here's the assembly space. That is the part of the room that can be cut off with a guillotine door. 1, 2, 3, 4 panels here. Here is the balcony. Here is the tech level, which is, in fact, the tech level is the ground level. There's the main lobby right outside. It's like we sawed through the whole of ground floor, not all of it, but the Wong and the lobby part of it. These are the lighting, the gantries, the lighting bridges. The overhead grid is here, and so on. So with this and the equivalent centerline section for lighting designers or floor plan for lots of other people, a skilled designer can get a very good idea of the three-dimensional space. All right? All right, so let's go back to winners and losers. This is a pretty good example because the performers, conveniently enough, almost entirely stays seated in one place. So let's say, I can't remember exactly, but let's say it's somewhere in here. And let's say that for whatever reason, Jonathan wanted to have a light and it ended up going here, and because these are little icons, it ended up being a source for 50 degree. Well, that's probably not a great choice because that's a very comparatively wide angle instrument. But maybe there would be another one that we could pick. Well, one of these ones here, this icon, is again also quite wide. So these degrees here, 26, 36, 50, 70, 90, that's simply the designer or the information that tells you what the beam spread is. So the bigger the number, the wider the beam. But for whatever reason, let's say he has a particular reason why he wants this kind of a lighting angle, and he's got to figure out where to put it. So what he has to do is look at, to get an angle like that. So for example, if we pick this one, which is a simpler drawing than looking the other direction. If I hang a light here and I want it to be on that angle for whatever reason, then I know that the distance from, in fact, the performer, the part of the performer I care about, say the face, to the first place I can hang a light is going to be from there to there, and that's going to be the throw distance. And in the vertical, it's going to be that angle. And in the horizontal, it's going to be, or sorry, not the horizontal, but to the side, it's going to be like this straight across, with presumably the audience is sitting down here. That's a little more evident sorry, not that one, this drawing here. So here's your audience in Studio D for a dance show. And so this is the position of the audience in a proscenium or an end stage configuration. And if you want them to see a light coming in from the side, it's going to be to the side relative to what they're seeing. And so for him to have positioned it here, he figured out this is where it comes to be directly to the side with the audience looking at it from the front. And then whatever the intention of this instrument is, the 50-degree source 4, that's a kind of lighting instrument. We'll get there eventually. This is the appropriate position in the on the grid, and this is the appropriate position in terms of distance away to arrive at that particular angle of light. Okay, the old way of doing all of this was to do it all mechanically. So where is it all? Lighting angle. Okay, so this is a seminal textbook, Richard Pilbrow's lighting book. And here's the way it used to be done, and it was actually done either by literally drawing it out, or you actually made plastic triangles, and you did it all this way. So here's a standing actor. The actual point of interest in this drawing is the face. The person has determined that they want that light to be coming 45 degrees into the face. And by the way, this is classic recipe style theater lighting, as opposed to dance lighting or other kind of lighting. It was actually so prominent that it was called the system. And what it said was that you had a 45 degree in the vertical and to the side, and a matching one on the other side, and that was an easy way to get three-dimensionality into the face. And that was when I arrived at the SFU Theater, which I can show you here. This is actually a revised version of the Theater on the Hill. Revised in the sense that the theater was rewired and so on. But look at this; it's built right into the theater. So here is this side of the audience, and this is the other side of the audience, and there are actually lighting positions that are originally, in the original design of this theater, they were actually wired this way. So for example, this was a lighting position here, which continues on the other side of the stage, and it would literally be electrically wired so that there was a lighting place to plug in a light here and a place to plug in a light further down. They had the same wiring you could not separate the light in any way. If you plugged two lights into that, you got them on at the same time and to the level the same time. It was like a way of saving money, a way of accommodating dead simple lighting, and the whole thing was done that way. And so that's here's an example of that kind of thinking in Pilbrow's book. And the point was, you take the stage and you separate it into areas, and then you have a way of covering that whole setup. You have whatever angles you want here, and each of these areas has a light in from this side and a light in from that side and a light in, etc., all the way across. And from looking at it through this from side to side, it's done in such a way that this instrument here and this instrument here overlap, so people moving through the stage go from one light to another as seamlessly as possible. And there's a whole recipe book for this, right? And you can see this, most useful front of house angles. So this was all done this way, done mechanically. Now people are working with, initially, for example, when I worked with this program, MacLux, this looks like a drawing program. Yes, it's a drawing program, but it's a drawing program that is like a computer-aided design program. So each of these icons for a lighting instrument are actually data-based. So they are icons. I can, let me see if I can find the darn thing. Here it is. Just waiting for it to switch over. Darn. Okay, so although it looks like a little drawing, turkey. It looks like a little drawing, and it is a little drawing, but it's also has data, has information with it. So I can look at this and go, okay, so that icon represents a certain kind of lighting instrument, which I'm not going to try to move it one more, but it's a specific lighting instrument that has a 50-degree beam. I can, in this program, set the floor plane in the side view, and I can turn that light on the drawing program, on the lighting program, and it will draw an oblong on the floor that would be the light you would see from that particular lighting beam width from that distance at that height. So these lines here are actually not only lines. In a program like this, those are it's all this information is active. So let me say there's a simplified directing projects one here. Yeah. So this is Vectorworks. This is the common program that we now use, but it's an architectural design program initially, and we're using a subset of that program, Spotlight, I believe it's called, but I'm not a Vectorworks guy. So these are now, much slicker versions of instruments. This is not the actual program. This is a PDF printed out of that program, but same thing. So I can turn this on if I've entered all the data correctly, and I can see how big it is, and if it's too small, I can change it to source 436. If it's too big, I can change it to a 19. And all that mechanical work that I had to do before can now be done immediately and instantaneously. And so this is why I actually said that MacLux, from my point of view, was the most useful program. People often were aiming in those days at programs that tried to render the lighting, tried to display it. I think that's really only become useful in the last few years. Some incredibly sophisticated people like Rob Sondergaard, who was in our other class this morning and whose presentation has been recorded and we can make it available to you. He's been working in programs specifically aimed at moving lights that do this kind of rendering. But he's one of the first users of that kind of a program. Nowadays, these rendering programs are good enough and accessible enough that with some energy invested in learning them, you can pre-design your lighting, right? But as far as today is concerned, you can, instead of laboriously trying to figure out how big an area this would be covering, you can position the instrument, choose what kind you want, set a focus point on the floor, and providing that you've set everything up carefully and correctly, you can see what its coverage is, and then if you know a bit about how the drawing program is working, then you can set up groups of instruments that overlap. More on that in a minute. Okay, I hinted before that there's a range of tasks for a lighting designer, at least if you look at the types of performances they're working with. So one challenge is to design something that is quite specific. You could think of this as being more theater style events, theater as in theater as opposed to dance or music style events. Performers are staying in one place. There's often, quote, scenes. All of these rules are just generalities. They are, don't get hung up on them. They're broken all the time. But you know, the Jonathan Ryder design, or for example, this one here, this is my design for a Judith Garay piece, and it's also in Studio D. In this case, though, this was a combination of very specific, it's a dance piece, but it had scenes in a way that you wouldn't necessarily think a dance piece would have unless you were thinking about, I don't know, West Side Story kind of thing. But some of the lighting instruments are very specific. So here's one for the home position for this particular dancer. But lots of the other ones are, if you know what you're looking at, these are computer-controlled moving lights. And what I was working with here was seeing what it was like to really light a show with computer-controlled moving lights. And so it doesn't really hit the mark entirely. It's not quite the same as you're actually lighting a specific location on the stage, or this one's a little bit hard to understand, but this is the Vancouver East Cultural Center. This is a Boca de Lupo piece that was on a set, and it's called Suicide. It's in 2004. The equipment is, since this is the other side of the stage, very specific, very specific scenes and locations, and every instrument here, most of the instruments are lighting a specific thing, and then there's instruments around it that are generally lighting other things. But let's look at the other extreme. Here's that lighting plot. This is a lighting plot in Studio D for a student dance show. And once again, the challenge here is you've got quite a few different pieces. They're dance pieces, so they tend to work a much larger area. Dancers are moving through the space. And aside from other things like, we're not lighting actors standing, talking. We're lighting, again, generalities, but we're lighting the moving body in space with no set pieces. And so there's a tremendous amount of lighting coming in from the side, either on what are called booms, vertical lighting positions, or on overhead lighting that is hung in this kind of a show, hung up on the lighting grid. The importance of the lighting in from the side and from behind, backlight, and from overhead, all of these lighting is for the body. Much, much more important than lighting from the front as a gross generality. Often it's kind of the opposite end of that McCandless area lighting thing that I've referred to before. And because really you're lighting the body, and sure, you need to see the person lit well, but not to the extent that you're going to put a tremendous amount of effort into it. So, but what's important to understand here is that all of these keep repeating. So look, here's tips. This says warm tips, cool tips. A tip light is jargon for a light out at the end of the pipe on the grid. So this here is actually above this. Well, I'll do it on this side. So this here is, take this one here. This one here is overhead. Well, this one here is directly above the floor stand. So if you think about it, there's one, this is a unique instrument, but 1, 2, 3, 4 instruments vertically stacked, and they are, all of them, repeated up and down stage 1, 2, 3, 4 times on each side of stage. So there's a tremendous amount of lighting coming in from the side. What it's doing is setting full stage patterns, and this is what's called a magic sheet. Doesn't have to be done with circles and everything. Here's a perfectly sensible one from Winnipeg, from the Rachel Brown Theatre, which is at Winnipeg Contemporary Dance. It's an entirely dance-oriented theater. This is jargon. Shins are the very low lighting instruments. So, for example, here, this is a shin. It's short for shin buster, named by dancers for obvious reasons if you think about it. The next position up is a mid-body height. There's sometimes a high side, and then there are tips, which are pipe tip, jargon for pipe tip. Okay, so if I go to the magic sheet for this same show, you can see these are all grouped. So these are front lights. They're in a not a terribly colored. This is a light, what's called a bastard amber. There are lights overhead in almost a no color blue. There's a whole set of light emitting diode LED instruments that are that can make almost any kind of color you want, and they're not very high quality instruments, but this is a way of putting color down from above. And then there's these tips, right? So this is not the way they actually work, but it's a short way for the designer to understand quickly what he needs or she needs. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 repeated in another color here, a strong blue, and then the middle ones, same kind of deal. They're in a lavender, and then there's the lighting. These are the shins. The fact that they say C changer here means that they have color control and they can change on their own. And then there's some backlights. And then lastly, Christian has put in, for dance, a rather extensive, at least for our dance, a rather extensive set of front lights. And so that's all of these ones. You can see the pattern. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is huge. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where's the fifth one? I don't know where the fifth one is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So this is a way of creating a general purpose, highly adaptable lighting arrangement made out of what are thought of as washes. So each of these categories here qualifies as a wash in the sense, and what a wash means in the jargon, same thing, right? Shins, mids, tips, warm and cool, backs, 3 color backs here, diagonal back gobos. These lights here move. These are mirror lights. But what Christian is setting up here is sets of lighting instruments that are highly controllable because we have an extremely well-equipped studio. And so this one is doing the same as this one, as this one, as this one. So that's these tips. And if the person you want to light is in this range, you're going to pick this one. But if you want to darken that one and they've moved downstage, you then dim that one out, bring this one up, dim this one down, bring this one up, and so on. And you create movement on the stage by the way you treat the lighting. So I think that is probably a tremendous amount of information to absorb, but there's lots more that we could talk about as we go on. But my point is really to tell you that when you get a chance to come into the theater, if you have your wits about you, and if you have understanding that there's a lot to be learned, that beyond just how to safely hang the instrument and put it together that way, then the end result is going to be, well, let's see. For example, if I sent, let me shrink this right down. If I sent a drawing like this to experienced technicians from out of town, I would fully expect that by the time I arrived, most of these lighting instruments would be roughly focused, because they would look at it and go, Oh, yeah, no big deal. He's doing 5 across, 5 deep, front wash. They would make certain assumptions about how much of the stage I was using. They would, at the very least, rough them in. If they saw a overhead or top light positions like this, they would go, okay, that's these instruments here. They're almost always hung straight overhead of where they're going to be pointing, and they would maybe be conservative, and because these instruments, as you'll see later, adjust in size, they might make them as small as possible, but they would look at this and go, yeah, I know for a fact that even though this instrument is drawn as if it was facing straight across, there's no way that it's going to be pointing at the pipes at its height. They would look at it and go, well, that's a downwash. In fact, he might have not even sent the drawing, and they're just going to go, clearly, that's a downwash, and they're going to point it straight down. And so what I'm trying to have you understand is that the origin of the lighting plot can be partly mechanical. Large parts of it are necessarily mechanical, but it can be a general purpose festival plot. It can be, in the jargon, a house hang. So, you know, a theater like Art Spring, community theater in Ganges on Salt Spring Island, but for that matter, the Vancouver East Cultural Centre, the Evergreen Cultural Centre, the theatres all over Vancouver do, in normal times, many shows, and they have, you know, whether it's the Norman Rothstein or the K Meek in West Vancouver or whatever, they are set up to do quick work on often non-professional shows. They have a lighting hang, what's called the house hang, that is there all the time. They might let you change it. They will always, but if they let you change it dramatically, they're going to say, but you're going to have to allow time and pay people to put it back where it came from, with everything colored the right way and everything focused the right way. But they will almost always have, we'll take a look at this here, you know, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. These are instruments, Fresnels in this case, whatever that means, that have a very simple piece of equipment in front of them that switches gels. These two here switches color filters, in other words. These two here, at the very least, these are those moving mirror lights. It's like having a follow spot, more or less, to some degree. And so it's set up, and it'll be set up around, what do we do in this theater? Oh, you know, lots of music, concerts, or, you know, community panel discussions, or this or that. If you go to the dance center, clearly, the dance center's permanent lighting plot is going to be something rather dramatically like this, because they do dance. You know, that's what they're about. And if you switch venues at our theater, and you're now in Studio D, and this is a lighting plot for directing projects. I cannot remember which one, not that long ago, but directing projects. What's the deal with directing projects? Well, 4 weeks of one-act plays with not a lot of time in between. So we're going to set up a version of a festival lighting plot We're going to very tightly restrict the amount of time that the designers and directors going from one weekend to the next have to refocus things. We're going to say, don't touch these things. Here's the ones you can touch. We're going to put a stipulation on them about how many instruments they can add. And oh, by the way, there's going to be 2 plays on one evening or 3 you have to share. And so some of these things are to a greater or lesser degree constrained. Others are, this is a one-off. Others are, this is a prestigious event that is going to use a large theater and has multiple days and quite a significant budget to specifically set up, and it's worth it. And so that's going to happen. So more on this in small detail and with, you know, much more about the equipment and how to hang it and what it does and that kind of thing. But hopefully, as we go on into that, you'll now think about it in a bit more of a comprehensive way and with an understanding of how it got to be hung there by you, and it won't seem quite so much as to a random event. Okay, bye-bye.